Hello there, BookTube. My name is Daniel. Welcome back to my channel, Guilty Feet. Na 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 na, the reflex, flex, flex, flex. And I've got no rhythm, green band today at work. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about books written in languages other than the one I read them in. So works in translation, and a little bit about my relationship to work in translation and whether this is something that we should be conscious of. Is this what we mean when we talk about diversity and other things? And I have some examples of some books that I read which were not written in English, but I read them in English. So I'm limited to this one language, and that's my experience. I think a lot of how people relate to works in translation will be to do with whether they speak other languages. I know we have people who watch this who speak and read in multiple languages, and I'm super fascinated to get their opinion of experiencing work. They've ever read a book in two different languages, i.e. in a translated version and in the original. I think that will be fascinating. My kids all read in both Hebrew and English, and they'll pick up a book in Hebrew and read that, and they'll pick up a book in English and read that, and yet they're unlikely to read in Hebrew a book that was originally written in English, and vice versa, because why would they? But something that may be written in a third language, they could just as easily read, translate into English or translate into Hebrew. And I'm very envious of their ability to flit from one to the other. But I've never sat down with them and said, okay, here's the Three Musketeers. Can you read it in Hebrew, then read it in English, and tell me if you think one version is better than another? And recently there's been a lot of push, and I think perfectly justified, that translators be given more credit on the cover of books for which they are credited as the translator. And I think there are some countries that do this, and the UK and publishers in the US tend not to, even though some translators are now gaining repute, and we're seeing a lot more instances of translators being associated with an author. Famously, Anne Goldstein has been translating Elena Ferrante for a while now, pre the Neapolitan Quartet and her massive breakout. And I don't know enough about Italian to know how much of her international breakthrough is due to this translation by Anne Goldstein into English, but there is a sense out there that Anne Goldstein played a big part. Anne Goldstein's work played a big part in helping those stories find an English language audience. But that's an interesting question. Do people think that, how much credit should one give to a translator? And I'd be interested to hear back from you guys as well. And then there are a couple of other types of translator or translations I want to talk about. Like, I've got the first two examples here are books that have been translated from their original language into English, but I have first-hand experience of listening to both these authors talk in English, and they speak beautiful English, accented. Definitely English is their second language, or not their first language. I have no idea if there are other languages in between their native, their mother tongue and English. But I've heard them be articulate and thoughtful and able to form ideas and answer questions in English. And so then one's ability, having written in another language, when a translator comes and does their job and translates your work into English, the author has that much greater facility to be able to look at a translation and see how closely it hews to the original work. And I think that must be a very interesting relationship, I guess, akin to if I were to have something I'd written translated into Hebrew. I'd at least be able to make out whether the sense was the same, or ask questions. Well, yeah, I know you've written that, and that's not necessarily, if I was thinking, that's not the verb I would have chosen, but can you explain how that, is there some kind of idiom here that I'm not aware of? You could ask questions and interact with the text if you have some of that language. So some of these examples here are of like that. Authors who I know are able to speak English, and others I don't know for sure. I think English is a fairly common language. I would imagine the educated classes or the novel writing classes around the world tend to have a higher standard of English than others. So it may be true also for these other authors, but I can't say for sure. One second. So I have some examples here from my collection of books that I've read that have all been translated into English. And I think certainly in the last few years, and even more so since I've been interacting with BookTube, I've become, I guess, more conscious of reading translated works. And I'm still not sure if when we talk about reading diversely, whether that includes people who happen to speak other languages than us. I'm not sure I want to conflate those two. That I think there is a value in reading authors from diverse backgrounds in one's own country and in the countries that one knows, and not reading authors that look exactly like you. So if you're a man, reading books by women; if you're white, reading books by people of color, and so on. I think that there is some value in reading beyond one's lived experience. I think there is a slightly separate value, and maybe they're the same thing, but maybe they're not, of reading books that come from wholly different cultures, the cultures that are separated geographically and by language. And maybe there's some overlap in that, maybe it's all just one question of diversity. But in my head still, I think it's a slightly, if I read a white, middle-class, middle-aged man who just happens to be writing in German, have I really improved my sense of other cultures and increased my empathy for? I've read a book in German, and I'm not sure I've really expanded my mind beyond what I know and what looks like me. But that's not it. There's no yes or no answer to these things, and there's even no yes or no answer to or the question of how diversely you have to read and how much you have to police it. And I don't really want to get into that, because I don't want to police my reading beyond just feeling comfortable that I am challenging myself and reading further and using books and novels and nonfiction as well to increase empathy and kindness in the world. Anyway, all that aside, here are some books that I've read in translation. I said the first two are books that I've heard both these authors speak in English, so I know they can, and I have no doubt they were involved. If I said, so I've got here David Grossman's A Horse Walked Into a Bar. I've got a hardback edition which I had sent to me in Israel, even though David Grossman is an Israeli author. It's translated by Jessica Cohen. I think I have 4 or 5 or 6 books by David Grossman, and I'm reasonably sure that Jessica Cohen has translated most, if not all of them. So they have had a professional relationship for a while. He actually signed this to me, and he's written my name in English and then Hebrew, so that's nice. I think either this time I've heard David Grossman a couple of times at the Jerusalem Writers Festival, and then this was the English launch of this book where I got this signed. The launch of the English language version of the book in Jerusalem. And one of the times that I heard him speak, he actually spoke at great length about the translation process and whether this is typical of an author at his level of standing. So David Grossman puts out a new book. He's not a first-time author. He's won prizes. He's sort of already been translated into several languages, and there is an expectation when his new book becomes available that it will be translated already into these languages. Countries are not waiting to see if it's going to be a success. He has a standing already, and a certain number of issues are going to be sold in Germany and in France and in Spain and whatever other languages that he may be translated into. And what he described was fascinating to me, that there is a point where they get all the translators from across several different languages go on a retreat with the author. So, but the idea that all the translators would come together to wrestle with particular passages or particular phrases, and have the author at their disposal for a limited period of time to actually tease this out and come up with some kind of working version in whatever language that they are supposed to deliver. I found that idea fascinating. So this is a book that I would highly recommend. This won the International Booker Prize, right? For that year. It doesn't have a sticker on the cover. So this was a couple of years ago, and I believe it won the International Booker that year. Intrigued me in the long list. There was even another Israeli author, the late Amos Oz, I think, was also up for that same prize with Judas, which I also recommend. So anyway, A Horse Walks Into a Bar good stuff, translated by Jessica Cohen, written by David Grossman. And I think that conversation that David Grossman was talking, where they were talking about translation, was in conversation with the Icelandic author Sean, which is how I believe that is pronounced. Interesting fellow, Sean. He nominated for an Oscar for, I think, the lyrics to one of the songs from Dancer in the Dark, so which he co-wrote with Björk. So he's written lyrics and written novels and poetry. A tall, imposing man, very impressive, very softly spoken, and of course. What was interesting about Grossman and Sean together is that both of them being translated from languages which may not be, there may not be a huge pool of translators. I'm guessing translating from Hebrew to Icelandic would be even more complicated, but Hebrew, English, and Icelandic into English, there's going to be a limited pool of translators. And the translator for this novel was, I had it open before, translated from the Icelandic by Victoria Cribb, and there is also Sean wrote me a little note when I bought this for him to sign. I've read one other Sean novel called The Blue Fox. This was my favourite of the two. It's a very slight, even a novella, it's 140 pages. Just a remarkable piece of work, and credit to the Icelandic is a language I know nothing about. Iceland is a country I know nothing about. So Victoria Cribb did this translation, and it's instantly accessible, but still a little alien, I guess, in a way that I don't have with the Grossman, because even though it's written in a language which I can't read, the places he's talking about is Israel, places that are very close to me. One of them is, it talks about a comedy club, which is 30 minutes down the road to where I live, in a town where my in-laws live, and so that was much more recognizable to me, even though it's originally another language. Here we're talking about a world that is utterly unfamiliar to me, and that's not just about language, that's about tone and setting and the way people interact, and that was fascinating to me, and I thought this was a very sort of accessible and fine bit of work in translation. That's Moonstone by Sean. This is a callback to a video I made a couple of weeks ago. I've got here Ties by Domenico Starnon. I put a sort of fake Italian accent. I don't Starnone. I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't speak Italian. But what's interesting about this is translated and with an introduction by Jumbo Lahiri, and to say, call back to the conversation that I had a few weeks ago about Jumbo Lahiri's decision to switch from writing in English to writing in Italian. Originally, her first book she had translated by someone else, and then her most recent novel, Whereabouts, she translated herself. Here is doing work on another author altogether. I read this because it was longlisted for the Tournament of Books a couple of years ago. And they put out a long list of sort of 70, 80 books, and I try and find which ones I can pick up relatively cheap just to see what happens. And then most of the ones that I end up reading don't make it to the shortlist, but that doesn't matter because I've read things that I would never read before, and this was a great example. One of the other things that I tend to do when I see that long list is see which books are under 200 pages, because I figure they'll be a low-hanging fruit and an easy lift, and this was another example of why I would have picked this up. I like this. I remember liking this very much. I don't remember liking it because of the translation. So I think, in some ways it's the translator's job to be out of the way and make things accessible or not accessible, depending on what the original intent of the author is. And this, even though I had read Lahiri and read her own work before I came across this, I don't think I even noticed that she was the translator here. And yeah, that says something for my how I relate to translators, which is, I think, getting better. But I may have read this and only come back afterwards and realize, oh wait, the translator was Jumbo Lahiri, a woman that I've read several times and loved, and maybe I should have paid closer attention. And I think I might go back anyway and read this introduction. I don't know if I read it at the time. Maybe I did. Maybe I read it and didn't realize it was by Jumbo Lahiri, but I don't have any memory of that. This was a book about a family and a relationship falling apart, and it was, I guess, too brief to leave a lasting impression, but that is Ties by Domenico Starnone, translated by Jumbo Lahiri. Another one which I think a fair few people on BookTube would have read is Flights by Olga Tokarczuk. This did win the Man Booker International Prize in 2018, so that's after the Grossman. I don't know whether he was 16 or 17. I'm reading now currently the winner in 2019. I've got the 2020 winner. So again, that's not been an intention to go out and read the winner, the International Man Booker International winner each year, but it so happens that I've been picking them up, and I think that's a BookTube thing, that I'm hearing people talk about these things, and it's coincidence that each one of these has won, because they've shown up on my radar without a real intent to be a reader of works in translation, but I'm becoming more of one. Anyway, this was a really interesting read, because part of this is translated from the Polish by Jennifer Croft, and Tokarczuk since won the Nobel Prize for literature, I believe, last year. This was a really unsettling, weird, staccato read, but the overall impact was sort of engrossing but alien. And that's what I talk about, reading a work in translation. There is that sense always that perhaps there's something you're not getting, and it's not because of the language, and it's not because the translation is separating you from the original intent of the author. It's that just the way language is used by this culture and this country may be slightly different than the way that I'm used to. And I found that certainly. I haven't read a lot of books in translation from Japanese, but I read one Murakami book, and I found that incredibly alien to my culture, and very different. Not it sounds like a pejorative, not off-putting in that way, just so different and so in contrast to what I was used to, that was really a little bit unsettling. I haven't gone back and read Murakami. I think I had other issues with that book, but I know that other people sort of love falling into that sense that the world is more things in heaven and earth than contained in our philosophy, or some bad quote. Anyway, Flights by Olga Tokarczuk was odd in the best way, and chunky but very readable, with an unsettling story at the heart of it, but other things branching off it. And I read this right at the start of lockdown when no one was taking any flights, and this is about being part of somewhere, or being able to escape, and what that means to be able to get on a flight and go somewhere else and change your culture, change your geographic status, and adopt a whole other thing, and right at a time when we were all feeling that we couldn't do that, we were very much stuck. So this had an impact on me when I read that. Now I'm going to talk about a book that I finished this weekend, and I'll do my end of the week, I'll do my Friday reads, but I want to talk about this just because I felt this was a failed translation. And that's not I think some of the problems I had with the reading experience here were to do with the translation. And this was this book, Havana Blue, by Leonardo Padura, who is a Cuban novelist, and this is a detective story, the first in a series that's come to be known as the Havana Quartet, about a Lieutenant Mario Conde who lives in Havana, and has some friends, and he's sort of scruffy, lots of very detective tropes that we know. He's scruffy, he's a mess, and he smokes too much and drinks too much, and the book opens with him being terribly hungover, but the chief telling him, "You got to get on, we need you for this case." "Well, chief, but I'm so hungover." No, you've got to be here in 10 minutes, I don't want to listen to any of your lip, and that kind of stuff. And so on the one hand, there was a lot of sort of that tired detective stuff, and I guess I'll talk about that more when I round this up at the end of the week. But what I want to talk about was the translation. That there was stuff going on here, I should say. I don't know whether I should name the translator in this case, since I'm actually laying some of the faults of this book at his door, but in the interest of fairness, and giving anyone who wants the ability to defend this guy, or they might know something about it, this is translated from Spanish by Peter Bush. And my issues with this translation, so this was published in the UK, this is Bitter Lemon Press. There were parts here, words, sometimes specific words that were translated, or words that were used, which jumped out at me as being not of a piece with this story set in Havana. And I'm trying to think of examples. When they when you write historical fiction and someone uses a word that didn't exist until the 1960s, but it's supposed to be the antebellum South, and someone describes something as grotty, but really we know George Harrison invented the word grotty in A Hard Day's Night. And that's anachronistic is the word we know. It's something that's not of its time. What would be the word for something that's not of its language or not of its geography? Does that make sense? And I'll give you the examples I have in here. Is that for most this reads very nicely as very normally as a detective work, and then there's some part where he uses words which are British English slang very specifically. One was particularly jumped out at me was when he talks about snogging. Snogging is the English making out, kissing, what you do with your girlfriend when you're 15 years old. You go behind the bike sheds and snog her, or take her to the back row of the movies and snog. It's a very, very English expression, which seems out of place in Havana in whenever this was set. It's not yet winter, no. It's written in winter age. No, I think it's before then. I think it's in the 80s it's supposed to be. And then there's also a point where they talk about football, or they go to they're following their team, whatever, and he calls someone a couple of times a wanker, which again, this is, I don't want to labour the point. This is a word that's in common use in the UK, which I don't think would be, it felt odd putting that word into the mouth of a Cuban, even though you're translating it, to find a word that is very specific to a wholly different geography. So those kind of things, when they take you out of what you're reading and make you focus on the language and the translation, successful or otherwise, I think that's problematic. And I only minor points, and I apologize to the publishers and the of Havana Blue. I apologize to Leonardo Badura. I had problems with the book itself, which I would lay at the door of the author, but I felt also there were issues with this translation that was too colloquial, too British, and took me out. The whole point of this is that we are in Havana, and it's Cuban, and it's different, and I don't know what that world's like, and all the things that we think we know about Havana, all the corruption and the climate and the sultriness of everybody, that's all there, and that's part of this story about this Havana detective. And then he's calling people a wanker, so that was odd. I'll finish up because I've done half an hour already on translated thing, so I'm going to finish up by punishing you all with a poem, gone back to a Polish writer. So this is translated from the Polish. Another Nobel Prize winner. This is Wisla Szymborska. I don't read a lot of poetry, and yet somehow I must have picked this up. It's got this lovely plastic cover on it, but I don't think it's withdrawn from any library. This may be a school book that was given out, but there's nothing to indicate. I bought this secondhand. It's got a lot of notes in it. Like someone has really marked up. I bet someone's done a lot of marking up of a particular poem or two. So maybe some of these poems were set texts for a school or a university. It says, it's written on top of it, Isabel von Oppen, number four, I don't know. The Onion advertisement. I don't know what is written there, but I didn't put my own name on it. Anyway, so Wisla Szymborska won the Nobel Prize in 1996, and I bought some poems to see whether I could read a Nobel Prize winning poet. What's fascinating to me is that these are all in English, and what's frustrating to me is that it says translated from the Polish, and there are two names here. So we don't know I have no idea what the relationship between these two translators. So the two names are Stanislav Baranczak, I'm sorry if I butchered your name, Stanislav, and Claire Kavanagh. Sorry if I butchered your name, Claire Kavanagh. And so I don't know for each poem whether they worked together in the translation, whether one did the translation into English and another one worked on the rhyme, because some of these poems translated from the Polish have a recognizable and precise rhyme scheme, which I think is a level of translation beyond even what we've been talking about up till now. And just to give you an example, I'm going to read one of these poems. This is from early on. This is from a collection called Calling Out to Yeti, published in 1957. And this is a poem by Wisla Szymborska, translated by either or both Stanislav Baranczak and Claire Kavanagh. And in English, it's called Nothing Twice. Nothing can ever happen twice. In consequence, the sorry fact is that we arrive here improvised and leave without the chance to practice. Even if there is no one dumber, if you're the planet's biggest dunce, you can't repeat the class in summer. This course is only offered once. No day copies yesterday. No 2 nights will teach us what bliss is in precisely the same way, with exactly the same kisses. One day, perhaps, some idle tongue mentions your name by accident. I feel as if a rose were flung into the room, all hue and scent. The next day, though you're here with me, I can't help looking at the clock. A rose, what could that be? Is it a flower or a rock? Why do we treat the fleeting day with so much needless fear and sorrow? It's in its nature not to stay. Today is always gone tomorrow. With smiles and kisses, we prefer to seek a chord beneath our star. Although we're different, we concur, just as 2 drops of water are. I think that's a terrific poem. It's called Starting Twice. It's in this collection, View with a Grain of Sand, selected poems by Wisla Szymborska, written originally in Polish, translated into English by one or other or both of Stanislaw Baranczak and Claire Kavanagh. Have a great day. Bye.